Few films have embedded themselves in cinematic history quite like The Bridge on the River Kwai. The sweeping epic of honor, madness, and moral conflict set against the backdrop of a Japanese POW camp continues to captivate audiences more than 6 decades after its release. But what if I told you that, behind the iconic whistling of Colonel Bogey March and the unforgettable explosion of that meticulously constructed bridge, lies a production story so fraught with danger, deception, and near disasters that it rivals the drama on screen? How did a blacklisted director manage to win an Oscar using a front? What drove Alec Guinness to the edge of a nervous breakdown in the sweltering jungles of Ceylon? And why did the film's most pivotal scene nearly kill its stars and crew? Let's pull back the curtain on one of cinema's most celebrated classics and reveal the extraordinary truth that the cast and production team kept hidden for decades. These are the shocking revelations that change everything you thought you knew about the film that redefined the war genre forever. At its core, The Bridge on the River Kwai presents a searing examination of the thin line between military duty and madness. Based on Pierre Boulle's 1952 novel, the film follows British POWs forced to build a railway bridge for their Japanese captors, while Allied commandos plot to destroy it. But beneath this seemingly straightforward premise lies a web of artistic battles, political interference, and production nightmares that nearly prevented the masterpiece from ever reaching theaters. Columbia Pictures purchased the rights to Boulle's novel in 1955, but getting the film made would prove to be a near-impossible mission. Producer Sam Spiegel, known for his tenacity and often manipulative producing style, faced an uphill battle from the start. The British War Office initially refused to cooperate, fearing the film might damage Anglo-Japanese relations just 12 years after World War II ended. The American military was equally hesitant, concerned about the depiction of Allied POWs seemingly collaborating with enemy forces. The screenplay itself became a political minefield. Screenwriters Carl Foreman and Michael Wilson, both blacklisted during the McCarthy era, worked in secret, with neither receiving screen credit at the time of the film's release. Instead, the film's source novel author Pierre Boulle, who didn't speak English, ironically received the Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay. But perhaps the most daunting challenge was finding a director willing to tackle such ambitious material under difficult shooting conditions. When David Lean came aboard, he brought his perfectionist vision, but also his legendary stubbornness. What few realized then was how this creative tension would forge one of cinema's most perfect unions of vision and execution, though at a tremendous personal cost to nearly everyone involved. The studio initially balked at the film's projected budget of $2.8 million, astronomical for 1956. What executives couldn't foresee was how the arduous production would push costs to over $3 million, with filming extending months beyond schedule. But, as we now know, some masterpieces simply cannot be rushed, no matter how loudly studio accountants protest. The character of Colonel Nicholson, the British officer whose obsession with building a proper bridge becomes both his triumph and undoing, remains one of cinema's most complex protagonists. Yet the casting of this pivotal role revealed a struggle almost as dramatic as the film itself. Alec Guinness, fresh from success in British comedies, initially rejected the role outright. "I read the script and thought it was absolute rubbish," Guinness later admitted in his autobiography. What few fans realize is that Lean had actually wanted Charles Laughton for the part, but Laughton withdrew after just 3 days in Ceylon, unable to cope with the oppressive heat and difficult conditions. When Spiegel finally convinced Guinness to take the role, the actor arrived with deep reservations about the character's psychological journey. "I couldn't understand why this man would help the Japanese build their bridge," Guinness confessed in a 1973 interview. "It seemed like madness, or worse, collaboration." The tension between Guinness and Lean began almost immediately. Guinness envisioned Nicholson as a sympathetic, if misguided figure, driven by British principles of order and duty. Lean, however, wanted to emphasize the character's growing madness, the way military discipline can morph into dangerous obsession. Their creative battles became so intense that at one point, Guinness threatened to walk off the production entirely. In a letter discovered among Guinness's papers in 2008, The actor wrote to his wife, "David and I had a terrible row yesterday. I told him either Colonel Nicholson remains a man of dignity, or he can find himself another actor. The conditions here are unbearable enough without having to fight for the character's soul as well." What emerged from this conflict was something far more nuanced than either man initially envisioned. A portrait of a soldier whose rigid adherence to military code becomes both his moral strength and his fatal blindness. The performance would earn Guinness an Academy Award, but the personal cost was steep. He later described the filming as the most difficult experience of my professional life, and his relationship with Lean remained strained for years afterward. This tension, hidden from audiences for decades, is visible in every frame if you know where to look, particularly in the subtle shifts of Guinness's posture and gaze as Nicholson slowly loses his grasp on the larger moral picture. What most viewers miss is how Guinness uses his eyes throughout the film to signal this transformation, clear and direct when standing up to Saito, increasingly distant and unfocused as he becomes obsessed with the bridge. Now here's where the production story becomes truly remarkable. The Bridge on the River Kwai was directed by David Lean, who would go on to win the Academy Award for Best Director. But behind this official narrative lies one of Hollywood's most shameful secrets, a testament to the destructive force of political hysteria. The screenplay that formed the backbone of this masterpiece was crafted by Carl Foreman and Michael Wilson, two brilliant writers who had been blacklisted during the McCarthy era for their alleged communist sympathies. Unable to work openly in Hollywood, they wrote the screenplay in secret, with producer Sam Spiegel serving as the intermediary between the writers and director Lean. Neither man's name appeared in the film's credits. Instead, Pierre Boulle, the French novelist who wrote the original book, received sole screenwriting credit, despite not speaking English. When the film won the Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay, Boulle was not present at the ceremony, and Spiegel accepted on his behalf, perpetuating the charade. "It was the greatest irony," Wilson's daughter Becca later revealed. "My father created one of the most powerful anti-war statements in cinema history, and yet, his contribution had to remain hidden because of political persecution." The decision that changed everything came in 1984 when the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences posthumously awarded the Oscar to Foreman and Wilson. Both had passed away by then, officially recognizing their work after decades of erasure. Their names were finally added to prints of the film in the 1990s, a belated acknowledgement of their essential contribution. What few viewers realize is how this forced anonymity actually shaped the film's themes. The screenplay contains pointed commentary about blind obedience to authority and the absurdity of rigid ideologies, reflections of the writer's own experiences as victims of political persecution. Colonel Nicholson's gradual descent into moral blindness carries echoes of the Hollywood establishment that had turned against its own talented artists. This shadow authorship represents one of cinema's greatest injustices, and yet, paradoxically, it helped create a more textured and morally complex film than might otherwise have existed. The men who couldn't put their names on their work had embedded their own story of persecution into the narrative, hiding in plain sight for decades. The filming of The Bridge on the River Kwai stands as one of cinema's most grueling productions, a testament to both artistic dedication and human endurance. When David Lean insisted on authentic locations rather than Hollywood backlots, the production moved to Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, where cast and crew faced conditions that tested their physical and psychological limits. The jungle set became a pressure cooker of discomfort and danger. Temperatures regularly soared above 100 degrees, with humidity approaching 100%. There was no air conditioning, no comfortable trailers, and certainly no catering services as we know them today. Cast members, including stars like William Holden and Jack Hawkins, battled dysentery, malaria, and heat exhaustion throughout the shoot. "We were all half mad with the heat," cinematographer Jack Hildyard later recalled. "Some days, the camera equipment was too hot to touch with bare hands. We'd work for 20 minutes, then collapse in whatever shade we could find." Alec Guinness perhaps suffered the most severely. Dressed in full military uniform, including wool socks in the sweltering jungle, he developed a serious skin condition that required medical attention. More concerning was his psychological state. Isolated in a remote location, struggling with Lean's demanding directorial style, Guinness began experiencing what he later described as waking nightmares, where he would momentarily become Colonel Nicholson. During one particularly difficult week in April 1956, production shut down for 3 days when Guinness became so dehydrated he collapsed between takes. Medical records obtained from the set doctor in 2007 revealed the actor had lost nearly 20 pounds and was suffering from early signs of kidney issues that could have become life-threatening. The famous bridge itself became a character in this ordeal. Unlike many Hollywood productions where important set pieces are miniatures or facades, Lean insisted on building a full-scale, functioning railway bridge across the Kalani River. Local laborers and engineers worked for months to construct the 425-foot wooden structure, only for it to be spectacularly destroyed in the film's climax. What most viewers never realize is that many of the exhausted, emaciated prisoners seen on screen weren't entirely acting. The punishing conditions and extended shooting schedule had physically transformed the actors. William Holden later admitted, "By the time we shot the final scenes, I didn't need makeup to look like I'd been through hell. We all had." The production extended months beyond its schedule, with costs spiraling to nearly double the original budget. Columbia executives, receiving reports of the difficult conditions and mounting expenses, reportedly considered shutting down the production entirely. But Sam Spiegel, using his legendary persuasive abilities, kept the money flowing, sometimes through creative accounting methods that wouldn't pass muster today. This crucible of suffering forged something extraordinary, a film where the exhaustion and determination visible on screen wasn't merely performance, but lived experience. The bridge that finally appears on screen stands as both a fictional plot device and a real monument to filmmaking endurance. For all its grand scale and sweeping narrative, The Bridge on the River Kwai contains subtle details and artistic choices that most viewers miss entirely. Small decisions that transform our understanding of the film once noticed. Perhaps the most revealing is the deliberate costume evolution of Colonel Nicholson. When we first meet him, his uniform is notably disheveled after the march to the camp. But watch carefully as the film progresses. With each scene focused on the bridge construction, his appearance becomes incrementally more precise and polished. By the time the bridge nears completion, Nicholson has somehow managed to have his uniform cleaned and pressed, his posture becomes more rigid, and he carries his swagger stick with increasing formality. That was entirely Alec's idea, revealed the film's costume supervisor in a 1978 interview. He wanted a visual representation of how Nicholson was regaining his military identity through the project, even as he was losing his moral compass. Another easily missed detail involves the film's sound design. The ambient noise of the jungle, birds, insects, distant thunder, gradually diminishes as the bridge construction progresses. This subtle audio choice reflects how Nicholson's obsession with the project narrows his perception, drowning out the wider world and its complexities. The most brilliant hidden detail, however, concerns the bridge itself. In the film's first half, shots of the bridge construction are frequently composed with the structure appearing to rise from the bottom of the frame upward, suggesting progress, achievement, and ascension. But after the pivotal scene where Nicholson learns the bridge will be destroyed, nearly every shot shows the structure from a high angle, looking down, visually foreshadowing its ultimate fall along with Nicholson's moral collapse. Watch also for the masterful use of light and shadow on Sessue Hayakawa's face as Colonel Saito. When he first appears, harsh lighting emphasizes his role as antagonist. But as his power dynamic with Nicholson shifts, the lighting on his face softens, revealing a more complex character trapped within his own code of honor. By the film's final act, both commanders are often lit similarly. Visual equals bound by parallel obsessions with duty. Lean's composition choices contain another layer of meaning that went unnoticed for decades. Throughout the film, whenever characters make morally questionable decisions, they are visually separated from others in the frame, isolated by distance, light, or physical barriers. This reaches its culmination in the final scene, where Nicholson stands alone on the bridge, separated from everyone else in the frame, before his moment of devastating realization. These artistic choices weren't arbitrary aesthetic decisions, but carefully crafted visual storytelling that deepens the film's examination of how isolation, physical, psychological, and moral, warps human judgment. Once you notice these patterns, the film transforms from a straightforward war epic into a nuanced visual essay on the fragmentation of perspective under extreme conditions. The climactic destruction of the bridge stands as one of cinema's most spectacular moments, a perfect marriage of tension, timing, and explosive payoff that has influenced action filmmaking ever since. Yet what occurred behind the scenes during those final days of shooting nearly ended in tragedy, rather than cinematic triumph. The production had constructed a full-scale bridge over Ceylon's Kalani River at enormous expense. Destroying it would require perfect execution. There would be no second take. The explosion was scheduled for March 10, 1956, with multiple cameras positioned to capture the destruction from various angles. The scene called for a train carrying Japanese dignitaries and troops to begin crossing just as the bridge was detonated. What most viewers never learned is that the explosive charges were calculated incorrectly. The special effects team, working with local engineers unfamiliar with controlled demolitions for film, had placed significantly more explosive power than needed beneath the structure. I remember the explosives coordinator turning white when he double-checked the calculations the night before. Assistant Director John Carrison revealed decades later. He said to me, "If we proceed as planned, we'll be sending debris half a mile in every direction." The team worked through the night to recalibrate and reposition the charges, but uncertainty remained high as filming began the next morning. Adding to the tension, the train, a genuine vintage locomotive purchased specifically for the production, was worth a small fortune itself, and timing would be critical to capture its plunge into the river. Director David Lean insisted on remaining close to the action, positioning himself and a camera operator on a small platform barely 200 yards from the bridge, well within the potential blast radius. When producer Sam Spiegel learned of this, he reportedly attempted to have security physically remove Lean from the location, leading to a shouting match just minutes before filming began. A production memo discovered in 2003 reveals that insurance underwriters threatened to void all coverage for the final day's shoot unless minimum safety distances were maintained. Lean's response, scrawled in the margin, "Tell them to go to hell. We'll get the shot." As the train began rolling across the bridge, a horrifying realization struck the production team. The detonation signal, which was supposed to be synchronized with the train's position, was experiencing a delay due to faulty wiring. For several heart-stopping moments, it appeared the explosion might occur too late, missing the train entirely, or worse, at exactly the wrong moment, potentially harming the camera operators positioned downstream. The explosion, when it finally came, exceeded even the revised expectations. The blast sent wooden debris flying hundreds of feet into the air and created a shockwave that knocked over equipment and personnel who had thought themselves at safe distances. 2 camera operators suffered minor injuries from flying debris, and Lean himself was knocked off his feet despite his relative distance. What appeared on film as a perfectly executed sequence had, in reality, come perilously close to disaster. The train plunging into the river, one of cinema's most unforgettable images, nearly became a tragic footnote rather than a triumphant conclusion. That the scene was captured at all stands as testament to both the production team's skill and their perhaps reckless commitment to authenticity at any cost. The on-screen tension between Colonel Nicholson and Colonel Saito drives much of the film's dramatic power. Their battle of wills over whether British officers should perform manual labor becomes a proxy for larger conflicts about honor, dignity, and cultural values. Yet the relationship between the actors playing these roles, Alec Guinness and Sessue Hayakawa, held its own complicated dynamic that eerily mirrored their characters. Japanese actor Sessue Hayakawa was a fascinating figure in his own right. A massive star during Hollywood's silent era, he had been one of the first Asian actors to achieve leading man status in American cinema. But the advent of talkies and rising anti-Japanese sentiment had derailed his Hollywood career decades before Kwai entered production. At 67 years old during filming, Nearly a decade older than Guinness, Hayakawa viewed the role of Saito as his last chance at career redemption. What few people realized is that Hayakawa, unlike his character, spoke English with limited proficiency, having spent much of his career in silent films, and then in Japanese and French productions. Sesshu would memorize his lines phonetically, revealed script supervisor Angela Martelli in a 1998 interview. He understood the meaning, but the nuance and delivery were enormous challenges for him. He would practice his scenes alone in his quarters for hours each night. This language barrier created a genuine communication gap between Hayakawa and Guinness that paralleled their characters' cultural divide. During early filming, the two actors barely spoke between takes, with Guinness later admitting he initially mistook Hayakawa's intense concentration for aloofness or even hostility. Christopher Nolan, while developing Dunkirk, 2017, specifically screened Kwai for his production team, focusing on how lean balanced intimate character moments against spectacular wide shots. What remains revolutionary about Lean's approach, Nolan explained in a 2017 interview, is how he makes the psychological and the spectacular feel interdependent rather than at odds. Beyond technique, the film permanently altered how writers approach military characters. Before Kwai, military figures in film typically fell into simple categories: the brave hero, the wise leader, or the cruel enemy. After Nicholson, screenwriters increasingly explored how dedication to military principles could become its own form of blindness, a theme visible in everything from Patton, 1970, to The Hurt Locker, 2008. The film's practical influence has been equally profound. The explosion of the bridge established new standards for practical effects, with directors from Steven Spielberg to Christopher Nolan citing it as inspiration for their commitment to in-camera spectacle rather than shortcuts. When Nolan crashed an actual 747 aircraft for Tenet, rather than relying on CGI, he was working in the tradition Lean established. Even the film's troubled production created a template that filmmakers continue to follow: the idea that extraordinary difficulties can forge extraordinary results. When Francis Ford Coppola faced his own production nightmares in the Philippines while making Apocalypse Now, he reportedly told his distraught crew, "Remember what Lean achieved in Ceylon. Sometimes, hell is necessary." Perhaps most significantly, Kwai demonstrated that audiences would embrace moral complexity in war narratives. The film's refusal to offer simple heroes and villains opened the door for everything from Mass H, 1970, to Saving Private Ryan, 1998. Films that question the very nature of heroism rather than simply celebrating it. The whistled Colonel Bogey March has become so embedded in popular culture that many who whistle it have never seen the film. It appears in diverse contexts, from The Breakfast Club, 1985, to Spider-Man 2, 2004. Each reference a small tribute to the film's cultural permanence. Even the film's famous final line, "Madness, madness," continues to echo through cinema history, having been quoted or paraphrased in dozens of films and television shows exploring the insanity of conflict and the tragic cost of moral blindness. At its core, beneath the spectacular explosion and behind the 7 Academy Awards, The Bridge on the River Kwai delivers a devastating message about how easily human beings can lose their moral compass when fixated on principles detached from their larger purpose. This remains the film's most enduring revelation, one that transforms how we understand not just this classic, but the very nature of heroism itself. Colonel Nicholson begins as a figure of principled resistance, standing firm against his captor's demands that officers perform manual labor in violation of the Geneva Convention. His initial stance appears heroic, even at great personal cost. Yet, as the film progresses, this same rigid adherence to principle gradually transforms into something darker, an obsession with the bridge that overrides the larger context of the war. What Lean and Guinness created, noted film historian Mark Harris, was cinema's most perfect depiction of how virtue can curdle into vice without the person ever noticing the transformation. Nicholson never stops believing he's acting honorably, even as he effectively switches sides. The film's genius lies in making this transformation so gradual that many viewers, like Nicholson himself, don't recognize it until the devastating final moments. When Nicholson finally asks, "What have I done?" the question resonates beyond the character to implicate anyone who has ever prioritized a narrow interpretation of duty over its broader purpose. This message carried particular weight in the 1950s, just a decade after a war where following orders had been used to justify unconscionable acts. Though set in World War II, the film spoke directly to Cold War audiences living under the shadow of nuclear annihilation, another potential outcome of military logic detached from human consequences. What makes the film truly timeless is how it refuses to offer easy answers. It doesn't suggest that duty and principle are wrong. Indeed, these qualities initially saved Nicholson and his men from breaking. Rather, it demonstrates how even the noblest principles require constant reconnection to their deeper purpose to avoid becoming destructive forces. The bridge that gives the film its title thus becomes the perfect metaphor. A structure that should connect things instead becomes an obstacle when divorced from the question of what it's connecting and why. Nicholson's technical achievement in building a better bridge blinds him to the reality that he's aiding the enemy. His pride in doing something well overwhelms the crucial question of whether it should be done at all. This tension between how and why, between process and purpose, remains as relevant today as in 1957. In an era of increasing specialization, where technical expertise often becomes isolated from broader contexts, the film asks a question that never loses its urgency. Does it matter if we build our bridges perfectly, if they lead to the wrong destinations? The film's lasting power comes from its refusal to provide comfortable distance from this question. We are not allowed to simply condemn Nicholson as a villain. We've witnessed his suffering, his courage, and his principles. His failure becomes a warning about our own capacity for similar moral drift if we fail to regularly reconnect our actions to their larger meaning. As you watch the film again with fresh eyes, notice how this message was hidden in plain sight all along, in the gradual straightening of Nicholson's uniform as his moral vision narrows, in the bridge that rises impressively even as his perspective diminishes, and in the final explosion that destroys not just a structure, but an illusion about the nature of honor itself. The Bridge on the River Kwai stands as more than a brilliant film. It's a testament to what cinema can achieve when creative vision perseveres against nearly impossible odds. From blacklisted writers working in secret to actors pushed to physical breaking points in the salon jungle, the extraordinary effort behind the film mirrors the bridge-building story it depicts, though with far more meaningful results. What makes this film essential viewing today isn't just its technical achievements or historical significance, but how it continues to challenge our understanding of heroism, duty, and moral purpose. In an era where rigid ideologies and blind loyalty to systems still threaten to override human judgment, Colonel Nicholson's journey from prisoner to collaborator without ever changing his principles offers a warning that remains urgently relevant. The next time you watch this masterpiece, look beyond the spectacular explosion to the human drama at its core. Notice the subtle transformations in Guinness's performance, the visual storytelling embedded in every frame, and the complex interplay between characters trapped in systems larger than themselves. You'll discover a film that doesn't just entertain, but illuminates the darkest corners of human psychology with compassionate understanding. If you found these revelations about The Bridge on the River Kwai illuminating, give this video a like and share your own observations in the comments below. Which hidden detail surprised you most about this cinematic landmark? Your perspective might help others see this classic through fresh eyes, just as the dedicated artists who created it hoped we would.